Joining me now is Florida Republican Congressman Carlos Gimenez. Congressman Gimenez, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, too.
So I just had this exclusive interview on the phone with President Trump. He touted the fact that, yes, the United States is, in fact, in charge of Venezuela. He talked about the fact that Secretary Rubio, Secretary Hegseth, Stephen Miller, the vice president would all be a part of this, but he said he will ultimately be making the final decisions. What is your assessment and reaction so far to the developments?
Look, I'm encouraged by what happened. Obviously, maybe not obviously to you, but here in Miami, this what happened on Saturday really has been extremely popular. We have a large Cuban population, a large Venezuelan population, and so we've been waiting. The Venezuelans have been waiting for this for like 25 years, and so. As a Cuban American, I'm very happy for them that Nicolas Maduro was arrested by the U.S. government. He is a narco-terrorist. He posed a threat to the United States. He is a criminal, as far as I'm concerned. Of course, now he's facing American justice, and we'll determine that once and for all. He'll be brought before a jury, and then they will determine whether the charges will stick or not. But I'm extremely proud of what the president did, and the people here in Miami overwhelmingly support the actions taken by President Trump. And so we thank him for the actions that he took.
And there's this initial phase, and now comes the really challenging part, which is that President Trump says the United States is now going to effectively take charge. I asked him if there's a timeline for that. He did not lay one out. He talked about the fact that there's some really tough work ahead. Do you feel, Congressman, as though you have enough information, enough details about how specifically the United States is going to proceed in Venezuela, the role that it plans to play?
Look, I think the ultimate goal is to have a free and democratic Venezuela. And so that is the goal, and that is the end of the journey. What road that journey takes, I don't think that there's a roadmap for this. I don't think there's a playbook for this. I understand why the president is dealing with with Delcy Rodriguez right now and that regime, because it's really still part of the Maduro regime that's in control, because we don't want to see bloodshed. We don't want to see civil war. We want a smooth transition. And what I want to see is a smooth transition to one, free, fair, democratic elections. And then once those elections are held, a process for a orderly transfer of power to the duly elected representatives of the people of Venezuela, and then we will have a free and democratic Venezuela. That's easier said than done. And so I trust the judgment of the people that the president has put in charge to lay out a path for the president, who will then decide which path to take. But I can tell you this, that maintaining Nicolas Maduro in power was not tenable. And that regime, it's not tenable. Now, why that regime would cooperate with us is pretty simple. I mean, there's an easy way and there's a hard way. There's a number of these regime members that are still under indictment, and so I'm sure that that is being used as leverage by the United States to say, look, this is the things we want to see. This is the policies we want to carry out. One thing that I do want to see right away as a sign of good faith is the release of political prisoners. And we know that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of political prisoners in Venezuela. They need to be released. And then a process where the opposition can return to Venezuela, have guarantees of security, and then if anything happens to any of these opposition folks, that we're not going to take that lightly. And so, it's like I said, it's easier said than done, but those are the things that have to happen. And the final thing we have to have is a free and democratic Venezuela, who will then become a friend of the United States. And then with its own riches, because Venezuela is unbelievably rich country, it's got some resources that are incredible, including the world's largest oil reserves, they can start the process of rebuilding their country with the help of the United States and other international partners.
You talk about free and fair elections. I believe the Constitution states that needs to happen within 30 days. Do you have confidence it will, in fact, happen within 30 days? Because President Trump signaled to me it could be far longer than that.
Yeah, well, this is a matter of months for me, not a matter of years. And so 30 days seems a little short, because again, Most of these opposition leaders aren't even in the country. You've got to now get together, decide who your candidates are, run campaigns and all that, and then have the Venezuelan people decide for themselves who they want. Look, there is a legitimate government in waiting, which is the government of Edmundo Gonzalez and Maria Corina Machado, but that happened about a year and a half ago. And I gotta say that, you know, I have a lot of confidence in Maria Corina Machado. She would have been the president-elect had it not been for Maduro disqualifying her from running for president. And then she threw her weight behind Edmundo Gonzalez, and then they won by 70%. You know, but again, what I want to see, and I think what the people of Miami want to see, what the diaspora wants to see, and I think what the people of Venezuela wants to see is you know, that we're walking towards and we're heading towards a free and democratic Venezuela. That we'll have some bumps along the way, and that will deviate to the left or the right or whatever. I understand that for reasons that, you know, pertain to the security of the Venezuelan people, but that has to be the ultimate goal, and we need to get there.
What do you make of the president's comments about Elena Machado on Saturday, saying she doesn't have the support or respect from Venezuelans, that Maria Corina Machado does not have the respect or support of the Venezuelans? Well,
I guess he hasn't spoken to the people I've spoken to. Look, I was in Oslo along with my colleague, you know, Maria Salazar. We went to Oslo when she got the Nobel Peace Prize. We met with Maria Corina Machado. I speak to and I communicate with her. Incredibly brave person. She's the one that actually set up the process where we now know that Maduro stole the election. She's very popular, and I believe she's very capable. Does she have the apparatus right now to control Venezuela? That's probably, I wouldn't say she does, okay? And so in order for us to assure that we have a good, stable democratic process, you need to make sure that the apparatus is there to assure success. And so you can't rush into this. And so that's why I think, look, you may not turn to, you know, that ticket as, you know, being the one to take over right now, but if you do have a process where you do have elections and they're free and they're fair, and then the people of Venezuela themselves can choose their next leader, I personally think it's going to be Maria Corina Machado who will be the next president of Venezuela, and she'll be very good for the Venezuelan people, and she'll be very good for the national security interests of the United States.
Congressman, very quickly, because we're out of time, if President Trump decides to do follow-on strikes, he told me he does not think he needs congressional approval. Do you believe that he does?
No, I don't. I think that this is a law enforcement action. The follow-up strikes that I'm envisioning from the president there are still some bad actors there that are under indictment by the United States. And then if he needs to go in and get them to bring them to justice, then I'm fine with that. And I think that that's what he's referring to, because there are a number of people that still have bounties on their head for their capture to be brought to the United States to face American justice. There are some really bad actors that I would hope he takes care of right away, that have really oppressed the Venezuelan people. And so I would hope that that would be his number one and number two targets.
All right, Congressman Gimenez, thank you so very much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.